Wealth Management Podcast.
Welcome to the ZHAW Wealth Management Podcast. Today from very downtown Zurich. We are in the old building of Manor in the middle of Bahnhofstrasse, overlooking the great Zurich Bahnhofstrasse. I'm joined by Marc Hauser today, new CEO of Trust Square. Marc, we're both Swiss, but we will do this in English. Could you introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, first of all, thanks a lot for coming over and coming in. My name is Marc Hauser, as you mentioned, and since June I have the pleasure to run Trust Square and lead here the transition into a Trust Square 2.0. I think we'll touch on it in a little bit. I think my background is very much almost 20 years back and forth with startups, FinTech, 6 years also at UBS, so in the finance side. Also co-founded 2 companies on the path myself, so very much involved in that space. And as you mentioned now with Trust Square, where we start TS 2.0, like the next generation, next iteration of Trust Square.
Fantastic, and we'll come to that. And as you mentioned, almost a financial services industry veteran with almost 2 decades under your belt, certainly a reputation for startups, fintechs. I mean, maybe starting with the industry, how would you describe the general state of the union of the Swiss startup and fintech scene as it is today?
Yeah, I mean, especially when we look at Switzerland, it has been 2 rough years, right? I think after the peak we have seen, obviously, 2 years back, we had a little bit a hard landing. But what we shouldn't forget, and I'm always a big fan of zooming out. And if you zoom out a little bit and look back the last 10, 12 years, you see we are still on a very, very high level. This is fintech, but generally startup in Switzerland in terms of how much money is invested in startup companies. And also, if you look at the number of rounds, the number of deals, investments that have happened last year, we were at an all-time high. Even though I think many feel the pressure, so what we definitely see is that the rounds getting smaller, and what we also feel is a lack of the huge, the mega rounds, where you maybe invest like 100 million plus. We had in the past we had a VFox, I think it was 150 million, and others that really did big rounds, and those are a little bit missing out. But in terms of number of rounds, it's still an attractive area, and we see a lot of activity ongoing. It's not as easy as it has been, so it's tougher, and the founders need to work with less cash and be super focused on where to spend it, and especially be smart when to scale and how to scale.
Interesting, yes. I mean, what I can imagine, if I started my own fintech, obviously Switzerland has undoubtedly its key attractions. There are many, we'll touch upon those, but it's also, I mean, we're here at Bahnhofstrasse, it's super expensive. Rents are amongst the highest in the world, salaries, cost of living. The market is small, it's fragmented with different languages. You have mighty cantonal banks, retail banks, generally an overbanked environment. So it's tough to do business here for a startup.
It's definitely not easy, right? So I think you're spot on. Obviously, a small home market, 8-9 million people here, so that's by definition, it's just very limited. Which on the flip side makes every founder very much aware that they need to think beyond borders, and this from the beginning. And if you see companies founding maybe in Germany with a home market that is 10 times bigger, they don't think international from the get-go. So interestingly, I think it was 2 years back, I had a discussion with the innovation person from a big Chinese insurance company, and they do billions and tens and hundreds of billions of investment, like really, really big scale. And they said from Europe, the most startups that they get inbound is actually from Switzerland.
Oh,
and
wow.
that he was super surprised by this. And I said, I'm not as surprised, because it's so clear you need to think international from day one. And I think Switzerland obviously is also more a B2B market to start with. And then with access to the banks, the headquarters here, that also helps to internationalize and go into other markets afterwards. We still have a very good reputation, I think, in wealth, but generally in banking, and to leverage this as a brand for the startups, but also the companies to work with, is a good starting point. However, obviously it's expensive, right? And I feel like there was, I think in 2005, the book, The World is Flat. Now, almost 20 years later, it feels the world is really getting more and more flat, and we see more and more startups that have also an international setup, work remote, and only come together maybe once a month or even less frequent to have co-working sessions, whiteboarding sessions, and in-person touch points, but a lot is more and more fragmented and distributed over the world.
Yes, and probably this international mindset you mentioned. I mean, some say that's almost in our Swiss DNA. If you look at our old industrial companies or Nestlé's and the likes, SMI, you have to think international in such a small country, yes.
Exactly, and for founders it's super clear. It's clear this is a test market, it's a good test market, and use the companies that have international reach, but you know it's not enough. Right? To really make a scalable business, a big business, you need to think international. That's for sure. Europe can be the US or then Asia. Others go to Africa, but it's sure you need to go to a bigger audience.
Makes sense. Now that brings me to TrustSquare, or TrustSquare 2.0 that you mentioned. So it's been in the media, you're the new CEO. What is TrustSquare exactly? What's your business model? What are you trying to achieve?
So TrustSquare started 2018, so 6 years ago, with a pure focus on blockchain and giving blockchain a home. At the time we were down at almost the lake, Bahnhofstrasse 3, opposite of the SNB, the Swiss National Bank, and I think famously in the news at the time with putting the Bitcoin logo on the Swiss National Bank through a projection, and really bringing the different collaborators from the academia, but also the insurance companies together and work use cases around what blockchain can solve.
And hence TrustSquare, the name comes from that blockchain heritage.
Exactly, it's obviously the blocks, but also the square where everyone comes together and has a discussion. And for us now it's also really opening up and thinking beyond blockchain. I think blockchain and entire technology has reached a stadium or a status where you don't need to lead with the technology, but you need to start leading with what problem you solve. Right? I think currently if you look at quantum startups, they can lead, I'm a quantum startup, people will search for this. But with blockchain and obviously before that maybe mobile, cloud, web, you don't say I'm a web startup or I'm a cloud startup or I'm a AI startup, I think is in shifting, right? Obviously AI has been around for a long time. There was a hype now around AI startup, but I think you need to think around what are the use cases that we solve, for whom, and why is it an oxygen level problem rather than just a vitamin. And then technology should follow. Which is the best technology to use? Can be blockchain inside. I think makes sense to have AI inside these days. Obviously on cloud, obviously on the web, maybe mobile first if you have an end user application. So that's our focus, to open up, and also with the old idea of the square, bringing everyone together from the corporate side, the startup side, tech partners on the blockchain side, that can be the protocols, academia, very important, and I think increasingly also the wider ecosystem where I put also government with regulation, that is especially also in the finance area, and if you think blockchain, AI, very important. So it's crucial to have everyone around one table and discuss the issues together and think of what are the use cases that will bring technology to the masses, but not just pushing the technology, but by leading with the use case.
Got it. And what's the business model generally? Is this an ecosystem or a co-working model or an incubator or a fund, or what exactly do you do with these?
Yeah, so historically it was very much a co-working plus event, bringing people together and having a membership. And I think this is also where we are ended up now. So we have the co-working, the offices, the private offices here at Bahnhofstrasse. We have also still the Renweg, where we also have desks and startups. Then we do a lot of events for ourselves, but also for third parties. So we have a lot of big names coming in and doing their events here, either publicly or just closed. And then the third element is all around the ecosystem, membership for access and services within that. That can be included a sponsorship for some flagship events that we are doing, or access to the space, maybe even bringing the people here from the company that is a partner and makes us a client event or an employee event out of their usual context and bringing in a little bit of a spark of something new where we speak or get speakers.
Ecosystem, exchanging ideas, etc.
Exactly. For me, it's very much the inspiration part, but more and more we need to also shift into doing things, right? So less talk, more action, a bit under this philosophy, and get into working mode as well. Yeah.
Now, Marc, obviously you have a ton of experience in startups. I think I saw you on other panels commenting. Now, when these startups come to you and introduce themselves, their business models, etc., what are some of the do's and don'ts you see? Maybe success factors, but also things that go wrong. Obviously, some of your companies will succeed, some may not. What are some of the common mistakes, or also good things that you see with them?
Well, you mentioned it, right? The odds are against you. I think that's clear to every founder, or should be clear. That it's usually it doesn't end well, right, in terms of the business success. But I think very important for me is really what is the problem that you're solving, that you're addressing as a startup, as a founder, and why is it oxygen and not just a vitamin level? Why do I really need this as the target audience, right? Knowing what I solve for whom. So for me, that's really number one. And then the second point is why you? Why should you as a founder team, early team, be better than the others out there? And what we usually see that leads to success, always with exceptions, right? But what definitely helps is, for example, if the person or the founders have had the problem themselves in a previous role. For example, they worked in a big bank, had the problem themselves, and now go out because they were frustrated, didn't find a solution, and go build it themselves. So it's really why you, what is your unfair advantage versus all the others that are trying, and if you find an attractive niche, there will be others trying. And then when you look at fintech within finance, you just can't ignore regulation. And it helps to have someone who knows the ins and outs of a bank and what does it mean. If you don't have it in the founder team, make sure you are closely connected through a strong advisor, really helping on what to do. Because the other side, if you're in a B2B and selling into the big banks, their reality is the regulated part.
Yes.
So your idea can be perfect, but if it doesn't fit in the regulatory environment, it's just super hard.
No chance, yeah, makes sense.
Then you just don't get in.
And if I may ask, I mean, as you mentioned, you've obviously done it before or twice successfully, but if Marc Hauser today had to, again, launch his own startup, what would that be? What industry, what could you imagine launching today if you had to do it with your own time and money and energy?
So I normally don't plan to found a company, right? So at the moment also not. There are a few areas that I find super attractive and I think very, very much relevant. One is maybe not a fintech, but it's around all cyber security, cyber attacks. I think everyone feels it and sees how much more phishing is happening. The phishing emails are getting better and better and better. It's not anymore just a random prince writing, oh, I want to send you 2 million, give me whatever. But it's really sophisticated with partners you work with. Maybe when you finished even a project because you posted on LinkedIn or Instagram or somewhere and it's public, and then there comes an invoice. And then, well, it makes sense. We worked with this company, looks real, and people start paying. And I think that's a really interesting area. We will see a lot of that. AI on the one side, hurting, right? On the attack side, doing much more. Better landing page, more similar email address. It's not these random email addresses anymore. It gets better and better. And then the defense needs to react. Another area I still am super interested is like decentralized finance. I think there we are still super early. Infrastructure more and more is ready, and we will see things happening. And the third one may be also relevant with a conference we just had in June is around digital identity. Now the EID will be coming, well, it's still in 2026, but it's clear. And this can, I think, automate so many processes that today are just bound to paper interaction, which in the future will not be bound to paper interaction, and just open a whole field of automated processing that companies will be able to leverage on and really jump on that bandwagon.
Fascinating. That's very interesting. I think we're already coming to a close. We need to wrap it up. Much as I could definitely get used to this view here, maybe if we end this conversation with an outlook, where do you think the Swiss startup scene is heading? And also, what are your, say, 5-10-year plans with TrustSquare?
Yeah, I mean, on the startup side, I'm just looking at my notes, but in like 10 years ago, there were 100 rounds being done per year, investment rounds that have been tracked by the VC report. And now last year we almost hit 400.
Wow.
Right? That's a 4x in 10 years, which is just crazy. And if I think back on the time even further, when I started pretty much my real career, after having worked in the sausage factory in the teenage years, in Institute für Jungunternehmen, Venture Lab, when it was the first year of Venture Lab, and there was almost no startup support. And we were touring Switzerland and giving basic advice to startup founders through events, networking, bringing access to conferences. And so if we look back and zoom out, right, I'm a big fan of, like, as I mentioned initially, like zooming out. And if you look at the last 20 years, so much has happened. Even though we have a small, it feels big, but if we zoom out, it's really a small dip in the last few years. I'm still very, very positive. I feel a lot of change in the corporate perception towards startup, working with startups. I think at ZHAW Square we believe that the future of innovation will be collaborative. So you can't just think of, oh, I have my own IT, I will develop everything my own, have it on my mainframe, like very placatively put. But you will need to work with startups because they just focus on a problem, all their energy, dedication, the updates are coming. So I see a lot of that happening, companies investing, creating their own venture funds, and through that adding fuel or money in that sense and opening the innovation space for them. So I'm really, really bullish on what is happening, even though maybe short term not, maybe it's, I think, still getting a little bit worse before it gets better, but I see a lot of light. For ZHAW Square, I think, yeah, one is definitely also going international. So we are looking at other spaces to connect, build bridges. I think the world is flat, it's becoming flatter and flatter, and the interaction between the different parts of the world will further increase. And if you want to be relevant, having a more international footprint is definitely one that helps. And for me, it's around building here at the ZHAW Square in Zurich and Bahnhofstrasse, just a place where people come, where there's a lot of things happening, and always you come to ZHAW Square, something good will happen.
Very cool, very uplifting. Thanks a lot. That's very interesting. We certainly keep our fingers crossed for all the founders out there,
Yes.
For all the startups, and for ZHAW Square. All the best. Thank you very much, Marc.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And
Pleasure
thank you for
having
your interest.